In our previous discussions of the Puppet master and agent infrastructure, we should note that all actions in the Puppet ecosphere begin with Puppet agents. An agent on an individual node has to become active to request a catalog. The Puppet ecosphere with just the master and agent setup has no concept of a push or a Puppet master forcing agents to do something. Every action begins with a Puppet agent. Another tool provided by Puppet Labs called MCollective, is also known as the longer form Marionette Collective, is the orchestration tool that allows administrators to essentially use the marionette strings to control the actions of Puppet agents. So the MCollective is what allows you as a system administrator to control the actions of many Puppet agents either at once or in batches or even one at a time. So if you're looking for a push capacity of how do I have my infrastructure do a Puppet run to do a software deployment, or how do I simply restart services across my infrastructure, MCollective is the tool that you'll use for this task. Now, MCollective is a middleware or a message queuing driven architecture. The basic components of MCollective are MCollective servers, which are essentially the equivalent of a Puppet agent. So a machine using MCollective and Puppet will have two pieces of software installed on them. One being a Puppet agent, the second being an MCollective agent or an MCollective server that will sit on the node and potentially control the actions of both Puppet and other services on the machine. MCollective also has the centralized middleware or broker infrastructure that is a message queuing environment. So by default, MCollective has always used a tool called RabbitMQ, but it can also be configured to use other message queuing infrastructures, such as ActiveMQ or potentially even commercial message queuing systems. Controlling the MCollective environment is also a client application. So in the operation of MCollective, the client application will place a message in the middleware, and all of the servers will subscribe to messages in the middleware queue and perform actions on each individual node. So when a client pushes a message onto the queue, all of the servers subscribe to that message and apply the command specified by that message. MCollective must be also configured with plugins. So by default, MCollective can perform only a few simple commands, basically seeing the status of an infrastructure. Actions have to be configured using plugins. So when installing MCollective, you'll want to also install the MCollective Puppet plugin. You may also want to install the MCollective Service plugin, which will give you control over the services on the individual machines. So for example, you could do a web server restart across your entire infrastructure with the MCollective Service plugin. There are also a few other MCollective plugins that allow you to execute operations on machines, but those plugins will also have some documentation on the potential security risks and downfalls of doing certain types of actions across an entire infrastructure at once. You can see running a faulty Unix command across an entire Linux infrastructure could have fairly disastrous results. So when installing and configuring plugins, you'll want to make sure to follow the directions about security, about setting up the kinds of plugins you'd like to use, and how you'd like to maintain control over your environment from malicious actors. MCollective and Puppet in general will use this SSL infrastructure to allow a public-private key exchange between servers, so there is a bit of a security layer to both MCollective and Puppet. But you'll want to be well aware of this when installing these in actual production environments. Later on, we'll install MCollective, but we'll do so in a way that allows us to demonstrate MCollective on a local laptop. So we won't install and configure a full public-private key infrastructure in those cases. But it is something to be aware of and to get to know when you're looking at deploying MCollective in a production environment. MCollective also has many other plugins available to perform many different tasks. And you can find out more about MCollective at puppetlabs.com/MCollective. There is a portal to documentation and information about MCollective and all of the plugins that you can use. Later on in this video series, we'll do a couple demonstrations of how MCollective interacts with the Puppet environment and how we can use it to control our entire infrastructure as a command and control point.